Okay.
All right, you're all set.
Okay. I also want to add, well, for a couple of minutes on Gisela, which is not fair, but Gisela works in philanthropy. She is the program director of uh, the New York Foundation for
Women's
Women,
Foundation.
Women's Foundation. She is a community-based organizer. She's a strategist above all. She is a social worker with an MSW from Hunter, and that can go on forever. But we got things to do tonight. Okay. So we start with the first slide, which is really the first slide is the you send the slide?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. The first slide was really Richie Havens' song, We Educated Ourselves. And we heard it while people were hooking up. And it is so true. Every word and every phase and sentence of this program, it's related to our mental health. It's related to how we have options to become better, and stronger than options, we have a responsibility, because that has been the history of our ancestry. How you will get to understand from many standpoints what an other is, what it is to be otherized. I came up with the word other many years ago, and I included it in the title of my first book because it was the only box that I could fill out when I was born. When they asked for, who am I? When am I? Authenticity. I have also come, and it's really important throughout our relationship together, and I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. This is a relationship that I want to have with you, and I don't want it just for this hour. And we have access to each other. I have come to believe that the notion, and I have gotten to this through a long process from the streets of Harlem, where I grew up, and where I spent the good first 25 years of my life. And I have come to believe the notion that we are ones that can free or imprison ourselves. Individually, we are the ones that can free or imprison ourselves. And this is important throughout my relationship that we're going to have when we speak to that. I don't believe that a government is going to free me or hold me hostage or tell me that I'm free. I believe that I am free, and all they can do is quantify or qualify my degrees of citizenship and what I can and cannot do. And that doesn't define my freedom. And from there, we go and we expand our ways of thinking and our scholarship. And then when we move on to the next frame, a little bit about myself. Born in Harlem, 1945. I find it critically important to make interdisciplinary sense of my entire life. Even when I was born, I wanted to know what happened the day or the month that I was born. I just don't want to be born. I didn't want to be statistics. And when I work with my clients and my people are otherized people that have a history of genocide and violence against us, I find it important during our relationship that we understand their early roots, even their own pictures. And throughout, we will get to learn and understand that we are in this together. We're not alone. Our struggle is everybody's struggle, and our struggle makes next person struggle easier. We just don't let it happen. And the same year that I was born, the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. Also important, in the year that I was born, that the welfare state was developed in the West. And that's important because that included the savagery in the system of capitalism and how the other and the word other became the academic language to manipulate our deviation and what I call colonial math. Very important in my relationships with people I meet with is I explain my interpretation and my use of the word colonial math. Colonial math, I believe that I, as a person, as a contributor to society, as a fellow brother and sister, and like James Baldwin used to say and said often, for all we know, we could be cousins. And I believe that. And with those words and his words and my streets, I understand that there are no strangers in my life. It's very easy for me to be introduced to other people, bump into other people, and maintain a relationship immediately going forward. I do qualify it. That's only among the otherized people. Outside of what is termed non-other, I do have a different story, a different category of a relationship that I must qualify for myself first. But among others, among the indigenous communities, I am them and they are me, and there's no them and us. We are one. And by colonial math, I mean that we live in the West and in a nation that is so easy to minimize people's lives. When there's a disaster, people, the news and reports will say we were lucky that more didn't die. When the problem that I have with that, I want to address those that died, because if my relative or any part of my community or any community died, I don't want that family to hear we were lucky. When the statistics are given for unemployment, I really don't, I don't appreciate that the unemployment rate went down, because for us others, the unemployment rate is 100%. And I try to do something about those that are us that are unemployed, and not say, gee, I'm glad. I mean, the other night we had the president's message. Yeah, I could have said so many things about everything he said. You know, inflation is down. Well, you know, inflation's down for what? You're going to pay people's rent? You know, the rent doesn't get justified. This is what I mean about colonial math. Empathy in the conversations that we have. I grew up at a time where those pictures above were not allowed out in the open. In Puerto Rico during the 1950s, they couldn't speak Spanish outside of our residence. You couldn't even have the Puerto Rican flag outside. That lasted for about 8 years until we brought it to the United Nations. In other words, if I hadn't thought of myself as being free, as I explained, then I would have helped these statistics. Instead of 8 years that was destroyed, it could have lasted another 5 years, another 10 years. That motivates us to not allow the non-others to define our freedom and where we can go and how we can live and our language. You have those pictures on top, which I got from the Schomburg Center in Harlem, which I do visit. I remember black baseball, the Negro baseball, the Negro League, Jackie Robinson. I was alive. I was a kid. I watched these players play. And we all thought we defined our freedom. The government couldn't tell us this. That's why we formed the Negro Leagues. And because of the economics of this country, they started, which is the religion of this country, they said they better let us in because more people are going to watch better players than our own. And that could go on forever, with these analogies. Same thing with basketball. So it's important that we understand that's up to us. Yeah, I'm free. If you're not going to allow me, then I'll build my own historically black college. But you're not stopping me. So we'll go on and
Well, I wanted to also just not miss this point, Luis, of the beginning of the conversations around the welfare state or the creation of the war on poverty, which is another war that has impacted communities of color for a long time. And the pictures that you have are actually, to me, reminiscent of the joy that actually occurred in some of these spaces, that some community spaces, some churches, right? Things that you speak about from your childhood, in which any place could really be created into a joyful space, given that so much violence and so much exclusion was a part of your life in your early years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gisela. And obviously, feel free to continue being like you always are with me. Okay. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we'll continue
this has
to.
been my life, and the welfare state. Gisela mentioned the war on poverty. I was the chairman of the board of the largest private not-for-profit started in Westchester, called WestCOP, the Westchester Community Opportunity Program, which housed all the Head Start programs and the community action programs. And I was the chairperson of a board of about 45 people, of which 48 were black and are black. And this war on poverty, it got me to, in order to improve the communication of the community we were supposed to service, as board chair, I deleted the use of the system, the
Robert's rules to
Robert's
run
rule,
meetings.
right? Yeah, the Robert's rule. I got rid of it because I wanted people to talk. Some of us are not fluent in this Robert's rule, and who can talk about who's meeting and who's up first and who's got the agenda, and I speak first. I got rid of that because communication is everything, and the welfare state is a profitable state. They call it a welfare state, but there's no but here. But with the over $40 million budget, $35 to $40 million budget I was controlling, there was the government contract in themselves were profitable and not for profit, because a lot of accounting firms would call me as their expert to foresee their not-for-profit clients' financial statements and their methods of operation. And there's no doubt, and this is why I also say that for us to be effective and to deal with our mental illness, we have to chase the money, chase the contract, chase the compliance agreement, change the compliance agreements, get rid of the math, colonial math, which is levels of service, et cetera, which I'll explain
Yep,
times
you're getting
were tough.
ahead of yourself, so
Yeah,
we're
getting
gonna move
ahead.
on to this one.
And the and maintain the spirituality when it comes to the arts, not only is the dancing, but recently I've seen the last two plays I have seen are in front of you, and it's wonderful. I love them both, but it's wonderful to see Black artists, uh, performers, and I became really crazy about Between Riverside and Crazy because that was me. I was between Riverside and Crazy, right in the heart of Harlem. Standing on 125th Street, going to La Marqueta. And the problem with Riverside Drive is that there were a lot of white people there, and if you could recall the first picture on me, could you go back to the first picture with my fist up in the air?
Yeah, because then I'd have to go back.
And then forget it. But if you can remember the first picture, I was a little kid with my fist. Yeah, I had to learn to fight. I got beat up a lot, and even at that time, I got to learn what freedom is and was, and why I got to believe that I have to free myself and not the government can free me. They could only try to freeze my citizenship, but they can't hold me captive because a lot of kids would come to me in grade school and tell me that God freed them and Lincoln freed me. And when you're 5 and 6 years old and beyond, that hurts. So they're from God and I'm not. I'm from a document. So these plays from uh, Sidney Poitier and in the play Between Riverside and Broad, we have Stephen McKinley, Henderson, and Conway. I mean, it's beautiful to see this. Also, James Baldwin was sitting a few rows in front of me, but
No, not James Bond, Alec.
Alec Baldwin. All right, so let's
Yeah, and
drive
what I
along.
will capture as well, if you recall from these plays, as they both address mental health, both address a type of breakdown from the daily lives. I think what both are trying to also showcase is the chase of that additional dollar. And I've heard you say this, like, just one more dollar, that the concept of the American dream, the chase of being included and seen as an equal, I think it is at the heart of where the insanity sort of unfolds for both. And so I think just relevant to this conversation is, while these stories are amazing and very much feel familiar, it's also those breaking points in which we're not connected to the rest of the community, where we lose that sense of belonging to our own communities and the grounding that we have, that we are also good enough, right? So those I think really showcase that.
Yeah, and in Harlem, like the last demonstrations, it won't be the last one that I was at was a few years ago, well, about 5, 6 years ago. Joyce Giselle will correct me, when a beautiful basketball woman star who lived a few blocks away from me, where I used to live, and in a drive-by, she was killed. And this woman had a full scholarship to play basketball in Notre Dame and other colleges. They were trying to track her down. So we did occupy the corner, right on 125th Street in Amsterdam. We were there from 11 till 1 o'clock in the morning, demonstrating, groups of people, and I was like holding a class there, and Al Sharpton came to join the class. And it was quite a scene that we cared. This is our community,
and also intergenerational, right? It was
Interracial.
young people, grandmas, aunties, everyone really cared about the people that live in those projects, which are seen as just metaphors of poverty, right? So
Yeah.
we'll move on to the
Yeah,
next
we did that for a
slide.
couple of weeks, and Gisela and I we were in 145th Street in Harlem, Malcolm X Boulevard, and I'm seeing these reconnaissance planes flying over us, and right halfway block down the street, we actually stopped by to get some fried chicken and French fries, which we love, and then regret later. There was a demonstration going on with the reconnaissance plane going, and it was a newspaper people there yelling out. We were yelling out, "Harlem is not for sale," and that's a movement that's been going on since when I was a kid, because Columbia University ended chasing me out. So this gentrification is a problem. And this is attached to our mental health. What we know, as I witness in the news and in person, rent strikes that happened during the 60s, and burning buildings in the 60s and late 50s, as I witnessed that, I learned that we needed to take control of our lives, which is why I turned to the Black Panthers. As I saw often I saw them walking down the street in rows and talking, protecting us, and I learned all about community organizing that way and many other ways. And the Young Lords also, and got to know many of them. I speak to many of them. I'm very good friends with the founder of the Young Lords, and we understand the stress, but it cannot conquer us. Okay.
We'll keep going so that we can. So do you want me to read out the James Baldwin?
Yeah.
To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time, and in one's work. And part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but it's what's happening all around you and all of the time, in the face of the most extraordinary and criminal indifference of the most white people in this country and their ignorance.
Yeah, that was James Baldwin, and I want to. There's a part of that sentence that is it involves in therapy when we talk to our people in mentorship, but it's happening all around you and all of the time, the face of this extraordinary and criminal indifference. When we start understanding that the reason we may be in a session is a movement. It's not it's an isolated moment between a mental health worker and the individual. But every one of those moments added together like a chain make the next person, I don't even want to talk generations anymore, because our condition is so violent, and public space is so violent. We need us, the otherized community, the subaltern, the indigenous people. We need to bring forth all the spirit that we had, that our generation brought us from Africa into the Caribbean, into all of the Americas, and say, we are people, we are all people, and we will not be treated indifferently. In the little boxes there, I went down to Brazil, spent about a month in Brazil, and only to visit where slavery prospered, and I mean prospered. The houses that you see underneath in the last picture there, all those roofs were made from molds of slaves' legs. In other words, a well-to-do homeowner, owner of a property, could afford to get a very healthy big man and use his legs and create molds around them, his legs, and use them and create the roofs that you see in front of you. Many homes like that. And the less the poorer person, the poor person could not afford the same legs. Whatever leg they gave them became the roof, and they got a lot of water leaks. Our pain is not only personal, but also we all own each other's hurt. And it's important that we understand in our sessions the mosaic, the progress that we're making by just talking to each other and being together, and know that we are not alone, and we will thrive, not just survive. We can thrive, and it really makes a big difference in session when people start understanding their baby pictures all the way forward, and understanding that it's a process that we cannot ignore.
Great, we're gonna move on to the next slide.
Some social definitions. We have in the first picture, el trabajo, the work. That's what happens. We are known about the work, the social definition, and then we have the pictures of slavery, and this is and these
Revolt
are,
in some ways.
excuse me.
Revolting in some ways
Yeah,
as
the
well.
revolting and the whipping of the dogs. We are accustomed. How do I apply that? Those dogs are very significant to me. I live in a home and I have a dog. And when there was this older Black woman that would walk up the street with her dog on her own, and when she would see my dog, she would stop and say, "Please move the dog." And I wouldn't even question it. I'd say, "I'm sorry," I would apologize and put the dog inside. And the history of that little picture that you saw from me will never end, because what I saw with an old lady, that during my time as a kid, we had dogs chase us. And when she asked me to remove my dog, it wasn't my dog that I was looking at, which, by the way, I call Harlem for Harley. I call Harley for Harlem. And I thought of the pain that we went through with these dogs chasing us down the street all over Morningside Heights and on 25th Street, all the avenues. And we have a sign next to that. Nothing in this country is free. If you get this sign stands right outside a very wealthy neighborhood when people come out of the train, because on the other side of the train tracks, which we know what's on the other side of the train tracks. This is brutal. This is brutal. And the stress, if anybody that does not have stress, the only people that can not have stress are those that are dead. Because to come out of a train where you just come back from doing labor and seeing that people assume that you're getting free labor, that you're on welfare. But meanwhile, that sign should be in the wealthy homes where they have all the tax breaks, all the tax evasions that they can use. And we have issues of paid time off, which we don't have. We don't have leisure time in this house, in this country. How can we not have leisure time and expect not to make big pharma wealthier by all the medication that we have to take? This is.
I think we wanted to also place these social definitions here so that we are also aware of the constructs they create, right? There's always, someone who's superior to the other in the language that's the haves, the have-not, the have-nots, who can achieve the American dream when we talk about workers. I think also the imagery is significant to point out that we are often also kept from thinking that we rebelled against, oppression. that for the Black community is sort of like, oh, you were taken here, and that there is sort of an assumption that people just willingly got on these votes, and that at every point during slavery, and I don't recall who said this, but people fought back. Black people fought back, right? And so when we think about why they had to train dogs to chase people, and it was precisely because people were fighting back, always trying to find their freedom, to save their communities, to live differently, and not be under these oppressive models.
In my first book, Another's Mine, I started out with saying that I get fired a lot. I do get fired a lot. I haven't had a full-time job since I was 55. And the reason I get fired a lot is because I really mean it till my death. That I will not, I believe James Baldwin's statement that for all I know, you could be my cousin. And when they talk about, when the conversation around board meetings, since I usually have a very high position wherever I work, where they come out with racist language and they say, oh, Lou, we don't mean you, you're different. I go off on them and I get unemployed. I cannot tolerate it, but I'm not asking everyone on board here to do the same thing. It took years for me to, at every stage, we have something that we could do to help the movement at every stage. I was up to the stage where I couldn't not only take it anymore, but I was not going to starve to death because I just know how to live via the streets and maintain myself and my family.
I want to be mindful of time, and I know we have other slides that we want to actually capture some of the practices that.
Okay.
Yep.
So
and so I'm going to skip a few as well, but I think this one is an important one to capture what basically really the violence that we see daily, and the triggers and the ways in which that impacts our mental health.
Yeah. I was asked to go to Italy, Pisa, Italy, to give a lecture on otherism at the university there, and walking through what I call alleys. It's not an alley, but for me it was an alley. Pisa, I saw that sign. What we do is worldwide, and I've also protested for the Palestine movements, and these are bullets from an artist who I know and I've invited to my classroom at Fordham University, where I taught for over 20 years, to take her art, and explain what keeps us going and why we still have to do this. Those are bullets against the wall there. Books that relate to our therapy. The Body Keeps a Score. Again, the trauma that we come across. Our need as mental health workers, mentors, whatever title we want to use individually that you can choose, it must be done. There's no doubt in my mind that one has to be interdisciplinary. Even to the point where Karl Marx, you have to know about Karl Marx. You must know. It's not, well, maybe I'll do something else. No, we need to understand the economics of this country, understanding the Karl Marx, which is not easy reading, but it helps in a session to understand the solution and what our battle is against a system that makes our misery very profitable. And the oppressor for the oppressed, it's Pablo Freire. All this we must be interdisciplinary and continue in order to be effective during our therapy sessions. Can you tell that next?
So this is also a quote around public space, and it starts with, if people die of hunger, if millions of stateless people have no right to have rights, if refugees who try to flee to Europe are allowed to drown, if human beings are victims of targeted killings by democratic states, then our concept of democracy interwoven with market economy and the nation state form is insufficient. It has become clear that capitalism itself is a religion. The sovereign biopower is regulating life and survival strategically disproportionately, via granting access to our exclusion from resources or via the regulation of health, sexuality, and security. We're certainly seeing this play out. This is very much around the rights of women that I'm very engaged with, but at this as well as other communities, right? The otherizing of other communities, the painting you see at the top with the word minority, that's, you know, a student who reflects around feeling that, wearing it like a scarlet letter. And so public space, we must reclaim that public space to say we belong here, we deserve all of these rights as well.
And the author, Arendt, she used to be a teacher at Columbia University, and other places, right, at Columbia.
Right.
Right
So I want to keep going just because of time.
Okay.
And this one I think is a critical one to leave folks with.
The framing of our clinical definition. We need, again, I can't be redundant enough to explain the importance of interdisciplinary lens and intersectional approach. Without that, we are literally cheating our clients, not giving them the best that we can give them without an interdisciplinary and intersectional approach. We need to know more that's required. The days of specializing, it doesn't work when we're trying to deal with people under healings. And the design, there's an over reliance on diagnosis. I used to read when I was first in college, I started to take psychology, and what I didn't like about it, that every time they went to the disease, I was on that page. The next day, I know I'm this too. No, I'm that too. You know, damn, it was driving me crazy. This depending that this country had to come up with a definition of what's wrong with me. Well, nothing's wrong with me. I think the definitions are wrong. You know, we don't have to be wrong. The too much emphasis on cultural competence requires more empathy is more than cultural competence. You can't understand this through a book. You can't know it because you know how to speak my language and I can speak your language. Well, that's not good enough. And then too much on the evaluation tools. Again, we come down with colonial math and math that doesn't really work. The statistics, the age of statistics is profitable. It creates statistics that allows white communities and white people to write what they want to write about, and we're forced to study what they write about, and it's very credentialized. And power tools. Well, I went to that old lady, that black old lady that comes in, and all the black women that I know. For me, they represent somebody that I want to talk to. They are a healer. There is nothing better than talking down to a great grandmother who can barely walk, and what you can learn from what they have to say. The wisdom is unstoppable. They don't have any credentials for the West, but for me, they got all the credentials that I need. And then
which
we
is
have access.
Actually key to this particular picture, if you want to talk about
Yeah,
access.
that's me at a ceremony, at a indigenous ceremony in Guatemala. And wherever we go, we always go to the indigenous areas because we want to feel comfortable. And there's a ceremony, and there's a lack in our healing of addressing and paying attention to our indigenous methods of survival and our indigenous medicine. And what I've always believed, which is very important, is access. And if you don't have access to a service, it doesn't exist. And it's important to understand that.
Great.
You probably want to add to that, or?
No, I think this is actually a good segue to this and talking about why you're a part of wanting to entice and mobilize other people of color to become to create therapeutic spaces. So you're a part of a collective here, and the mission being to significantly contribute to the healing of our community by providing culturally relevant, non-racist, non-sexist, bias-free psychotherapy while simultaneously creating a strong collective of Black and Brown healers and aiding their professional growth. And you all work in longstanding impact and contribution to positive mental health outcomes in the community. So if you can just give a brief overview of the type of community you're building here.
Yes, and the community that I go, I work a lot with people that have been incarcerated. I work with young kids. We have been, I was on the board, when I served on the board of New York State, the New York State, New York NYCLU, Civil Liberties Union. I was on their state board. We did a lot of work on legalizing academic participation in class or in the public schools. Being born 1945, 9 years before Brown versus the Board of Ed, I can still say that Brown versus the Board of Ed had yet to start, had yet to become effective. The Reconstruction era is not really 1877, it's 2023. We need to fix these states and bring into psychotherapy and understand this. When people say, well, it's not as bad as it used to be, that's a colonial math concept. That's a mind that needs correction. Well, is it getting better? It's irrelevant if it's not getting better. I'm still in pain. You know, we're still not there yet. So having the right circle of therapists, and Amira, a wonderful person that I'm under, and an individual by the name of Yao, also from Amira, have lifted me and given me hope that that little kid is still growing up.
So I'm gonna actually stop us here because I'm mindful of time, and there are 2 questions in the Q&A which I can't see if I'm sharing my screen. So I'm gonna stop the presentation here, and I think we should actually get back to folks who have had some questions. So the first question is, as per none others, did the term welfare state also apply, or was this term only to apply to Brown and Black people returning from war?
Well, that's a question that's going to take a while. There are most people that are poor or white in this country also. It's a phenomena. However, their options for solution are different than Black and Brown people. And that makes a difference. When you have choices, then we have to examine the reason for the poverty also. But since you brought up World War II, I also want to, the war, the veteran, we also have to understand. I also want to bring out there that even under Democratic President, federal FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when the military people came out, when the veterans came out of World War II, suddenly victorious, they weren't so victorious for Black and Brown soldiers, as it was in World War I, where brown and Black soldiers were killed defending Tulsa race riots in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So even veterans, the reason the suburbs are white is because we didn't get the money that we needed that other white soldiers got for benefits to buy our homes. So, enough of the Reconstruction being 1877. And I'm also proud to say the lawyer for the lawyer for the Tulsa race riots was Buck Franklin, and and his son, Dr. John Hope Franklin, became a mentor of mine, and we had a great relationship. And his he's written the most books on history. He taught me how to understand history, and many books on slavery, Medal of Honor. He is the person um, in history as it relates to the otherized people for me, as well as others. So it's a good comment, and it also allowed me to bring in other parts of the conversation. So thank you. If I haven't answered what you wanted, let Gisela know. I can't see your question.
No, so I think the other was just a comment on not forgetting that there's books, made easy for something, or books for dummies, all of that also creates a shortcut model, I think, for very important things that, like cultural competency, that the anchoring of the community, Black and Brown communities, and their experience is not found in any of that, but credentials are given if that was the resource.
As we're zeroing down here, I also want to indicate again interdisciplinary. Jürgen Habermas, a German social theorist, spoke often of the analysis of reason and emancipation, and the emancipation is on us. We can do this. Also, it's also good to know that that our progress is really dependent on how much faith we have in each other, so that we understand that we are emancipated. We didn't need a government statement. And the other thing that I want to mention is that recently I learned from the other side of the world that one of of saying this in a different way, and I'd like to leave you with this, that in the West, one would see that there is no independent I, that we should understand that there's no independent, it's not about I. However, most of us live in a way that there is an independent I. A lot of people think that it is impossible to live out of community. Being an I does not work. Any other comments or questions?
The other, I don't think so. We answered live the two things, but I did want to just, I think, close out with the paradigm slide so that we can continue this conversation next week. But I think really important to the point you're making right now of there's no I, right? That we're all interconnected. I think you've made those connections in your work. So I just want to show that slide and close us out. So just briefly share, as we're talking about how to manage our stress and staying connected to community, what played a role here. Maybe just mentioning the mentorship and the words here.
This is the mentorship is Dr. Franklin and myself. Underneath art and storytelling, you want to explain that picture?
Yeah, the artist here is Rodriguez, and there was a film made about his story called Searching for Sugar Man, and he was famous in South Africa with music that was written by him in the 70s, and he was a better songwriter than Bob Dylan, but never realized he was famous here in the States and was famous in South Africa. So he lived his whole life as a day laborer and humbly writing his music, which really inspired a movement in South Africa.
Right. And then right next to it, I have diaspora. That's me in Puerto Rico with my Black Lives Matter t-shirt in Puerto Rico. And I love those words. Together, we are more. We need to remember that.
And now a Dominican community that's growing also in Puerto Rico.
Yes. Any more comments? Questions? Anything anybody want to say?
Good. So
I would
oh,
like
go
to
ahead.
say something.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
please.
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to point out the treatment that Turkey, I don't know if anybody has heard what's going on in Turkey, but they had a massive earthquake, and I think more than 2,000 people have died so far. And the United States what has the United States done? But then we have, European countries like the Ukraine that go under this invasion, and all the resources, all the tax dollars go to that cause. But again, Turkey that goes through this emergency, natural disaster, what's the country doing? So I just wanted to point that out, speaking to the hypocrisy here in the United States.
And that the news cycle just throws those images at you, right? So maybe at least you can share just your own reaction to having seen the people being pulled out of the rubble.
Yeah, I think they should give us a warning that the following pictures, they do that for sexual stuff, but to see a baby being pulled out, they should at least, I want to see it so we don't forget, but some people, we got young kids looking at this, Brian?
Brian?
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having this conversation and being able to be there. And it's been amazing and strong there. I just kind of wondered in some ways, as you were talking about a lot of these types of things, as a professional, and then ultimately as you're working with communities, as a professional, as someone who's been through these sorts of situations and who's seen this in so many different ways. How do you see a way that you have to engage with communities differently that have been through, if you will, direct stressors, that have been, the true targets and have been the true, if you will, receivers of the stressors versus those that have been more tangential, those that have been more, sort of off to the side? And then how is that, how does that impact the work and the engagement that you have?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that. I think every person that we see, an individual, itemized, different formula, and what I use in order to try to help people deconstruct and move from there is I'm heavy with metaphors that applies to them specifically that they could understand, so they understand first that they're not alone and there's a solution there, and to understand their path and how they got to them, because it wasn't what they didn't do, could have done, or should have done. It's a lot more than that, because there are too many social traps for us to figure out, and a lot of detours that gets us to think that it's all our fault for something we didn't do, or could have done, or should have done, and that's not the case. And yes, Brian, we need to be specific. Our metaphors have to be specifically designed so they can understand, because language is everything. How you frame something, language matters. How you say something, understanding a language is a pleasure. It's a requirement when we're dealing with clients, and it makes the session more pleasurable, a better connection.
And I think, Lisa, I'll just add that it can become and even in a tension within the field of folks who for example, interpret addictions and just substance use in very like a formula that needs to be set, right? The boundaries piece of a lot of ways to deal with specific mental health issues. But I think there is something to be said about the words that are used, the sense of belonging, the sense that there is a commonality around feeling as an outsider because you have this thing, right? This deviance that you are, right? How do you get back to the mainstream, the norm? And I think like our field really tries to just like establish a norm and get folks to be in a norm versus actually being themselves, accepting the mistakes and the pieces that are not seen as favorable. And so, you know, it's a tension that I see even in my own field of philanthropy, groups that are in the criminal justice space, groups of folks who are led by directly impacted folks who've been incarcerated, who can say, yes, I was a substance user and I've recovered, right? Or I'm in recovery. They will get funding versus a group that says, actually, I advocate to provide resources within community for those who are utilizing substance use, that they have choice to actually navigate the world and not feel rejected, and find a space. And then maybe that's their road to healing. And that might be a choice not to use substances or not. So I work with groups like Vocal New York, whose work is really about making sure that folks are safe when they're using and not harming others, and really intervening in that way. But they are not there to say, you cannot be a substance user, like the doors close. And so I think that, and it becomes really hard then to identify funding because the world is just so shaped by you having to be a certain way. So yeah, I think like those are additional notes. Pete.
Hello, I want to say thank you, first of all, for giving me the platform to speak to you guys. Second, my question would be more like to David Baldwin's, speaking of Black and brown people always in a state of rage, and how we, every time we speak, it seems to be likened to deaf ears. And how do you navigate through that when the person that you're having that conversation with is on deaf ears or oblivious to the fact that you are speaking and you are stating your trauma and how you are perceived through that trauma other than what you are?
Right, Peter, it depends on the person you're talking to. If you're trying to talk through the social service organization, so through social service or unemployment office or the IRS, if you're lucky enough to get through, we get to you remember the words, if you don't have access to a service. So what that means, it doesn't exist, which means for many of us, the unemployment office, social childcare, all these not-for-profits that are very powerful budgets, spend their money. We get to understand that we don't have access to that. So we need to go underground and find alternatives. As we did with the Underground Railroad, as we did with everything. We are very creative and artful community. We know how to solve our problems. And many times what is available from a tax point, which is the difference between public and private sphere. The private sphere has solution, which is what I always say, that the US Constitution is not applicable to anybody, and neither is the Bill of Rights, because our voices are blocked off in the area. So to your question, it depends who you're talking to. And when it has to be a gatekeeper, like these agencies, we need to find other alternatives and let them blame us for being clever, for being creative, for even breaking their rules. When you don't have, it doesn't matter. Enough of us break the rules, eventually they'll get to change the rules, which they are now. But where sometimes it does happen. But don't let that stop you from doing what has to be done. There are ways around it, and you have access. You all have access to me. I think my email address is is there. You can.
Yep, I'm
contact-
gonna share it on the chat and it'll
Yeah, I can-
also be
we-
accessible.
We can be very clever. We do not have to be beat.
And also, I think that's what makes the case for also why you need more folks that look like us in different spaces and in different places to sort of serve as that rebellion and that radical change and the transformation in different institutions. But
Absolutely. I think I was in 8th grade. I was alive, but I saw on television the state troopers trying to, and George with blocking the first black president to go into to university. George Wallace, I think his name. Yeah, George Wallace. So we form our own country club, our own social clubs, our own university, our own basketball team. We are free to do what we want. We need good mental health therapists to help us know that it's not about you happen to be bipolar. Okay, I'm bipolar. What does that mean? How does that stop me? How can I move? How can I jump that? I'm still entitled to a life.
well, thank you all. I know we're over time. So I have put the contact info in the chat, and also know that you can get the recording, and the PowerPoint will be shared after next week, since we left some content, and really, it's more of the content that will have us in conversation a little bit more. So hopefully you can join us and invite others who haven't joined this week to have some conversations about a healing paradigm and what, how you're building your healing tapestry around your mental health.
You have access to us both. Access, we will not preach access and then you not have access to us.
So also thank you again to the Hope Center in Harlem for creating this space. And if you want to learn more about them, you'll also see that in the chat. So thank you all. Have a good night, and thank you for sharing this space with us.
Thank you both.
Bye.